This is Gemara Metziah Daf Yod Aleph, and today's shir has been generously sponsored by a very close friend of the Daf, as the Zchut Rafua Shlema. Excuse me, as the Zchut Rafua Shlema for Yeshua ben Sarah Devayra b'Siyata Dishmaya. No greater zchus than the zchus HaTorah. Torah Talmud Torah Kenegei Kulam b'Siyata Dishmaya. Yeshua ben Sarah Devayra should see an incredible Yeshua and Rafua Shlema via the Zchus HaTorah b'Siyata Dishmaya. We pick it up from the Mishnah on Daf Yod Aleph, continuing Kinyan Chatzer. Yesterday we had a deep dive, as everyone could realize, a dive that could have been weeks long. Whether Chatzer is Mishum Yadar Rav Yechanan, whether Chatzer is Mishum Shlichus Reish Lakish. Continues the Gemara, the Mishnah on the top of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Ra oisan ratzin acher Metziah. Someone sees someone else running after a Metziah. There's an object, and he sees people running after it. Achar tzvi shaver, after a deer with a broken leg. Achar goizlois shloi parchu, pigeons that cannot fly. Vamar, and the guy sees them all running after these items. He says, Oschali sadai, and believe it or not, they're running through his field. So he says, Oschali sadai, I want my field to be zeicha in this item. What's the halacha? Zaschalai, the field is zeicha for him. Continues the Mishnah Parpi Ayatzirat Kedarka Gaizlais Mafrichen. If either the deer is running normally, or if the gaizlais, the pigeons, are flying regularly, and the same type of story, and he says, Amar Zaskli Sadai, I want my field to be zeicha for me, Loi Amar Klum. So if the deer has a broken leg, excuse me, if the deer has a broken leg, if the gaizlais, if the pigeons are not flying, that's when we say that one can be zeicha with his field. But if the deer is running normally, then not. Says the Gemara, what's going on with one's field being zeicha and this Metziah for him? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, teaches Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel that the din in the Mishnah that your field is kaina is only you have to be standing next to your field. That's when your field is kaineh. If you are not standing next to your field, then your field is not kaineh for you. Says the Gemara, why? Why can't this field be kaineh for him even when he's not there? As we've seen, the courtyard, the chatz of a person is yes kaineh lai sheloi midaitoi. It's kaineh for him even without his das. So it should be able to be kaineh when he's not there. Says the Gemara, when do we say it's kind of like is hanimili bechatzer amishtameres? That's only by a courtyard that is guarded. Aval chatzer she'inay mishtameres. The courtyard is not guarded. Then in iloi. Then only if he's standing next to the field, that's when he could be kaineh. If not, not. So a chiddush or Rav Yehuda Shmuel is teaching us in the Mishnah. The Gemara now continues and asks, "When tamer this din of the Chadshim Mishtameres Yamim Satzadeu in Eloi. What is the source for this din? Where do we know that the only time you could be kaineh if it's a non-guarded field, which we're explaining is the case of our Mishnah, and that's when Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel is teaching us. It's when you're standing next to it. Says the Gemara, the Tanya learned in a Brayso Aimid Beer. Someone is in the city of Amr and he remembers and he realizes he remembers that he has some bundles, some sheaves, some items in his field that the workers have forgotten it there, but he's not by his field, he's in the city. And therefore he says and he declares, Lo Yehei Shecha. I don't want them to have the status of Shecha being the forgotten sheaves that the Aniyim are allowed to collect. So he says, Lo Yehei Shecha, I do not want it to be Shecha. So you would think, Yachal Lo Yehei Shecha. Maybe it works. Talmud Leimar says the pasuk, V'shachachta Omer Basada. The din of Shecha is when you forget basadeh. And from there we learn out only basadeh v'shachachta, if you forget it in the field, loy be'ir, and not in the city. So says the Gemara, before we even say what the raya from over here, that you only could be going if you're standing next to your chatzim ina mishtameres, says Gemara, 1 second. Hagufa kasha. First, Amr the Bray says, first, the Bray says, I would think it's not shecha. Alma what? Have a shecha, it is shecha. V'nasala Gemara. But then we bring a pasuk of what? Basad v'shechachta v'loy be'ir alma what? Loy have a shecha. So says the Gemara, before anything else, we got to get ourselves together. What exactly does the Brisa mean? Is it yes or is it not shecha? Says Mar, okay, so this is what Pshan the Brisa is, which eventually will bring a proof to Rav Yehuda or Shmuel that the only time you're kaineh with your sadeh, which is not mishtameres, is if you're standing next to it. If you're in the field and you forget it in the beginning, that's where it's shecha. Zachar, if you remember about these items, then it's not shecha. My time, why not? Why, if you know about it for a moment and then you forget about it subsequently, why does it not have a din of shecha? Because since you are there, has a din of your chatzar, and therefore and your chatzar will acquire it for you. So very good, you subsequently forget, but you're next to your field, and therefore very good, you forgot, but your field remembered, quote unquote. Your field knows about it, and your field will be kaineh for you. Says the Gemara, continuing explaining the Brisa, but when one is not next to his field, he's in the city, afilu, even. You remember about this shecha, you remember about these sheaves, and then you subsequently forget. Have shecha. Why? My taima. Because you're not there to be making a kinyan. Says the Gemara, that is pshat in the Brisa. And now from here, what do we see? That the only way that the field is kaina and zeicha for you is what? If it is gabe, if it is next to you, a raya, a proof, a source to Rav Yehuda or Shmuel, that the only time the sada is going to work is when you're oimed, if you're standing next to it. Says the Gemara, 1 second, umimai. How do you know this is pshat? Tell him, maybe it's a special gzeres like by shecha to besadin have shecha beer loy na have shecha. Says the Gemara, no, Amar Cross says the pasuk loy sashav lekachtoi. It's an extra pasuk that says you don't go back to take it. Shechas, the rabbi says, shechas ha'ir, which includes shechas ha'ir. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Hi by lav. You need this for that there's a special lav that once something is shecha, you're not allowed to take it subsequently. Says the Gemara, you're right. When him came name my lososhav to go back, the rabbi shechas ha'ir. Says more, what do you mean? Vakati b'ayilech we need for a different thing. Shalafan avein shecha, shalachrav shecha. That only that which is in front of you is not shecha, because you didn't get to those areas. Yeah, only that which is behind you, meaning that which you already walked by, and you forgot it over there. Sheho bebal tashav, you can't go back. Zaklal, this is the rule, says the Brisa. Zaklal, kol shu bal tashav, anytime you're not allowed to turn around and get it. Shecha is shecha, kol she'ena bal tashav, einai shecha. So says the Gemara, that's what the pasuk is needed for. If the pasuk is needed for this, therefore we have no way to know that the din of shecha could be applied to even when he's in the city. Amar Ravashi, Amar Kra, yeah, the rabbis shecha sa'ir. And so the Gemara thought that we have a makar. The Gemara concludes, and unfortunately, we do not have a makar. What do we see from the final pasuk of Yeh? That the din of shecha even applies when the owner is in the city. And therefore, what's the final bottom line of this brisa? The bottom line is that if you're not in the sadeh, but rather you're in the air, your chatzar will not be kaineh for you. And therefore, we do have a raya. One more time. Once we have yiyah, l'rabbi shecha zeir, that there is a din of shecha, which means you can't be kaineh with your sadeh. So now we have a proof. Why can you not be kaineh? Because you're not standing there. So now we have a raya that if you're not standing by the field is not kaina for you. Ula says the same thing as Rav Yudah Shmuel, as well as so we have Rav Yudah Shmuel, we have Ula, we have Rabbi Archana, we have a source for Shikha that what? Your sadeh is only kaina for you. Again, she'enoi mishtameres, it's not guarded. If it's guarded and you have fences and whatnot, it's a different din. But a sadeh she'enoi mishtameres is only kaina for you if you're oimid basad sadeu. If not, then you cannot have a kinyan. It continues the Gemara. 3 lines from the bottom. Esvei Rav Abba L'Ula. There was a story. Ma'isa Rav Gamliel Zakinim Sheyabayin Bisfina. Rav Gamliel and the elders are coming on a boat. Amar Rav Gamliel, and Rav Gamliel gets up and says, Isur Shani Asid Lamud. The Ma'isar that I'm going to eventually separate. And as Rashi points out, that we're talking about that he realized he forgot to take off Ma'isar, but he's on a boat, he's not home, and he's worried, Rav Gamliel, that the people in his house are going to think he took off Ma'isar, and they're going to come to eat the food illegally. So he says the Ma'isar that I'm going to take is Nasan Liyoshua. Rashi says, who's Yoshua? Rabbi Yeshua bar Chananya was with him on a boat, and he was a Levi, and a Levi takes Meiser Rishon, and therefore Rav Gamliel says the Meiser, which has to go to a Levi, should be given to Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, and that takes care of part A of his produce. Now there's no more Meiser in his stuff in his house. But the problem is, how do you give it to Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya? They're on a boat. The Meiser's where? The Meiser's in Rav Gamliel's house. So he said, you know what you're going to do? Mekaimai. And the place of where the produce is muschar loy, is rented to him. He gives $1. Consider that he rents that area, and therefore he is a kinyan on the meiser. The iser acher shani asalam on meiser sheni, it was a year of meiser ani. Nasan la'Akiva ben Yosef is given to Akiva ben Yosef. Why? He was definitely not an ani, but rather he was the Gabbai Stalker, Rashi points out. Therefore, so he Zeiche acquires it on behalf of the Aniyim, and its place is rented to him. So Rav Gamliel, on a boat, realizes his stuff at home. We know that Meiser works, b'machshava. Meiser works even when you're not by it. And therefore, he says, that which I will in the future separate is given to Rav Yeshua for Meiser Rishon. That which I will separate is given to Meiser Ani to Akiva ben Yosef. Now the Gemara articulates his question 3 lines down. Rav Yeshua, Rav Akiva, Besad Sadeu, Rav Gamliel ayu, Avayim. Of course not. They weren't standing next to the field of Rav Gamliel. And yet, what do we see? We see they had a kinyan. Clearly, you can be kind of what's in a field, even without being there. Not like everyone said, Amar Aleph. Omar Lei, Ula responds, Dami Haime Rabbanon, Kilokamri in Shishmaitza. Sounds like you never learned anything. Kiasa Letsura, Amar Leho, why? Hachi Amar Ula, this is what Ula said, Vachi Osvita, and this was the Kasha. Amayhu Me'Rabbanon Rav Gamliel, Metal Tali Agav Mekarkoi, Hikne Lehem. What's Pshat? Pshat over there is a Kinyan Agav. Because he was a Muschar, he rented the place to them. Agav that, they were kaina the metaltalin, and therefore it's not because the chutzner is kaina that which is inside of it. No, it's a different mechanics. It's a mechanics that the kinyan is working via the kinyan agav. Says the Gemara, Rav Zera kabla. Rav Zera liked this pshat. Rav Abba loy kabla. Rav Abba did not like this pshat. Amar Rava shabir aved loy kabla. It's good that Rav Abba did not accept this pshat. What's going on over here? Why did he rent him the field? If all he wanted to do was effect an acquisition, that the meiser that he's going to take off, the meiser ani that he's going to take off, what should he have done? Take your handkerchief, you take your yarmulke, you give it to the guy who's kainat mak, the who's being kainat, and you have a kinyan. So why didn't he do that? And the reason is because what did he really give? to Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, what was really given to Akiva ben Yosef? It was the Taivas Hana. It was the benefit that they're going to be the Kayin, that they're going to be the Ani to get the stuff. And Taivas Hana, which is the ability to choose which Ani, which Kayin, which Levi you give something to, that is not a din of Mamain. And because it's not a din of Mamain, says the Gemara, you cannot acquire it with Chalip, and therefore Hachanayim Taivas Hana in a Mamain. Then also you cannot be kainit agav the karka. But says the Gemara, good question, but no. V'lohi manas kohuna nesina ksibuhu. By the manas kuna it says nesina, and therefore chalipin derech mekach umemkahur. Who the reason why he didn't do chalipin because that's a form of kinyan of an acquisition of mekach umemkar. But to give it over via kinyan agav is considered a regular nesina, and therefore it will work. And therefore, says the Gemara, we have no kasha from this case, even though they were not standing next to the field. The way the kinyan was effected was via the kinyan agav. Says the Gemara, Papa Amar, another way of answering up for Ula, das acheres makna oisan shani. Another reason to explain why over here it worked, even though they were not standing next to the field, is why? Because someone else was giving it to them. In our Mishnah, in the original case of Rabbi Shmuel, which was the case of a Metziah, and you want to be kaineh, we said what? When you're being kaineh, your sheikhos, why? Because you got to be next to the field. But over here, someone else is giving it. If someone else is giving it, it's easier to acquire the item. Says Gemara, where do we know this from? The Tanam we learned in our Mishnah. Rav Yirmiyah said name Rav Yechon, another caveat in the Mishnah. That those who are chasing after it have to be able to reach it. Rav Yirmiyah asked, what is the story about my ton? If I'm giving you over an animal, let's say you can't reach the item before it leaves the field. Kibla minei Rav Abba Bar Kahana. It still is going to work. Why is it going to work? Why? When it came to Metziah, I said you have to physically catch the animal. But by Mitana, we're saying it works even without it. You know why? My time allow Misham. It's because when there's another person giving you over the item, it's easier to make a kinyan. Amrli Rav Simi, the Rav Papa, 1 second. So you're telling me that any time Ruvain is giving to Shimon, Shimon could kaina even without being next to his field. A special chiddush. Normally you have to stand next to your field. But in a case of das acheres makne, in a case where someone else is giving it, then you don't have to stand there. But as Rav Simi, the Rav Papa, what do you mean? Hari get? The das acheres makne, his son get is being given by someone else, the husband to his wife. And yet, Ula explained, she has to be standing next to her house. So why, by get, you have to, if you have this element of das acheres makne, someone else is giving it. Answers Gemara, 5 lines to the bottom. Shiny get isabel karche. Can't ask from get, because get is able to be done against the woman's will. What do you mean? The exact opposite. When it comes to get isabel karche, that you can even force the woman to accept it. And yet, what do we see? You would think if you could force her to accept it, it should be the easiest thing for her to be kainit. And yet, we see a fuch, we see the opposite. Matana, which is what? That certainly matana should only work if you're standing next to the field. And das acheres should not be enough. Ela Amar Ravashi, and we turn over to tomorrow's daf of Yubezim and Aleph. Again, I apologize, we don't have the Amen in front of us. Chatzis Rabbi Misham Yad. V'logara Mishlichos. Going back and connecting it to yesterday's daf. Chatzir, according to Rabbi Yechanan, is like a Yad, but it's also at some level a Shliach. So Gabi Get, Chayvula, Get is detrimental to a woman. She never want to get divorced. You have to be in front of the person, you have to be in front of them, that's why you have to be next to your field. Matana, which is what? Tischosula, matana is tischos, it's good for the person, therefore there'll be a din. Zachin la'adam shaloi befanav, you'll be able to acquire the matana, even not being next to the field, via zachin la'adam, that your field will act as your shliach, and it could be kind of for you even without you being there. We'll pick it up from Gufa on the next year of Siyata Dishmaya.